when I started the business, like so many small, passionate coffee roasters, I was like, I'm roasting every batch of coffee myself. I know what I'm shipping out the door, and that's never going to change.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've just got like a few questions for each of you, but feel free to, if you hear something, that sparks something. But let's start with you, Pascal, because so Union was one of those quite early to a lot of the trends that we saw and still see in specialty coffee. One of the big ones being direct trade. And so I'm just kind of curious how, you've been with Union. Was it 10 years? Did you 12 years? So obviously the relationship to that term has probably changed and developed, and what it means and how it affects your sourcing has probably gone as well. So I'd be curious, like when direct trades first started happening, when Union started like getting on an airplane or working directly with producers to now, how do you see the value of that relationship changing? Say maybe from a first thing to find good coffee to a marketing driven thing to what it is now. What is your relationship to direct trade?
Our relationship with direct trade, I do think a lot of things change. So I'm with Union 12 years now, or one of our co-founders, Steven Macatonia, well, Union is 23 years old, if you want to say it like that. He was the one who started many of the first relationships. And 23 years ago, it was different. Sourcing like an 83 or an 84 coffee was definitely not as easy, I think, as it is now. There was a lot less availability. So he would jump on a bus and go to remote areas of Peru and find these coffees. And some of the relationships that he started in 2003 are still people that we are working with now. So in that sense, nothing has changed. What I do see is that a lot of people that we work with, they, I suppose they just become better and better and better with year-on-year feedback on quality and working together. When we sourced from Rwanda for a very long time, and also in the beginning when we started, when we would buy container volume, we would cup sometimes like 20, 30, 40 different lots to construct the container. And now, because we've been doing that for so many years, we have been calibrating, they can now send us one pre-shipment sample, which we can approve or reject. So that in terms of the sourcing.
And how's it have consumers and how they resonate with that term? There's obviously a big period where that was on a lot of bags. It was like a really big push. How do you find what they look for now from the people sourcing their coffee?
Direct trades, you see it everywhere now, and it has different meanings, I think. That sometimes can be a little bit frustrating because sometimes like, okay, I know this coffee isn't bought under a definition that I would say is direct trade, but I think in the end, it's a good thing that consumers that it helps a little bit maybe in a narrative that coffee sourcing is complex, that it comes from farms in the global south, that we need to do something different compared to what the commercial giants are doing to drink better coffee, but to also help all these farmers that grow coffee. Um, I honestly don't think that when you ask an average consumer what is direct trade, that they really would get it. Um, but it helps to tell a narrative that something needs to change or something needs to be done different.
Yeah, interesting. And then I guess Dario, so that's sort of like values-driven way of starting something. How has, you said 5.5 years? So you imagine you start day one, like, we're gonna be fucking different. It's gonna be amazing. How has, as you've grown and you've faced challenges in scaling sourcing, and you face challenges probably maybe in like, how do I taste all these coffees as well as making sure the machines work and everything else? How has your view on sourcing changed as you've gotten closer to it and as you spent more time into it from those maybe early days that were like
Yeah.
really strong value driven? Have the values changed, or has the way you implement the values changed?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. When I started roasting coffee, it wasn't actually to start a business. I'd never worked in the coffee industry. I was just a passionate home barista. I bought a little bullet roaster, roasted like 10 batches of coffee in a weekend and realized it had to go somewhere. And a hobby business has turned into a proper business now. And my first frustration in the coffee industry in South Africa was the lack of availability of the kinds of coffees I wanted to work with. So direct trade for me was never something that I felt was like the right thing to do, or um, to gain some sort of advantage in terms of margins or anything like that. It was literally just a a necessity to access the kinds of coffees that I wanted to work with. So it's been very difficult to source the coffees we want at a small scale, and it's becoming easier as we grow. So I would say that's the biggest change that's happened over the last sort of 5 years, is that we've gone from a very small company to being in a position now where we can bring over our own containers from certain places, and we can consolidate with other imports from certain origins. And it's difficult. It's really, really difficult. Sometimes I feel like I have a logistics job, that I'm not a coffee roaster. It is very complex, and the drive for me has never been like, as you were saying earlier, Pascal, to like claim direct trade. For me, it was a case of I wish these coffees were available more easily, but they aren't. So we're having to direct trade. Today, though, it is a point of pride for me that we have these relationships with the producers we work with, and we get to select the coffees early on in the selection process. They aren't, selected by green buyers who then like send out spot samples, and then we get to choose from those. We're getting to choose from a wider variety, and I think that's allowed us to find the coffees that we're after. Yeah.
Awesome. And so I guess Ian, like you're kind of really you're earlier in the journey of this whole thing. We're kind of living through this amazing moment in coffee where God, I feel like I've been in it for 20 years, and like specialty coffee was just rare. You couldn't get it anywhere. And then maybe 10 years ago it slowly started being more common. And now we're kind of in this special space with lots of great coffee out there. As somebody kind of in that early days of the roastery world, how do you feel about differentiating yourself from what else is out there? I think values were one way that a lot of roasteries did it for a while, but then it's almost like the industry accepted a certain set of values as just like that's the minimum we all do. And so it's no longer like a separation among ourselves. It's still how we say separate against like the big guys, but not among ourselves. So how do you kind of differentiate when you're building your roastery?
I think similarly to Dario, like I didn't quite set out to start a roastery. We were a multi-roaster shop here, and after COVID, one of my good friends was running a very high quality white label company, and I realized that I could buy a much higher quality Ethiopian natural at 88 points. It would cost me less, but we would have more control over the quality of roasting, than what we were paying for, an 85.5 point Brazil. So that was the start, that we could have real control and start to have a little bit of control over our narrative. And really, we've kind of stumbled into wholesale and stumbled into e-commerce. But we have always, like, as a cafe, prided ourselves on the quality of our brewing. And that's what we're trying to reflect as a roastery as well. Like, what we're trying to do is compete on quality. So that means that we try to source really exceptional coffees. We try to source new to the market, like species that people might not have tasted before, or interesting processes. But even when we're doing something like we're buying Indian coffees now, we're trying to buy exceptional Indian coffees that are representative of the work that's going on to push coffee quality in India, but also which challenge our narrative. So really using quality as a way to kind of open people's minds to coffee. Because for our customers, like you can see our menu doesn't have any farm names, it doesn't have any countries, doesn't have any processes. It's focused on flavor. Because I think that a lot of our customers come in, we're in a very kind of business focused area here. A lot of our customers come in and they just want a coffee. Like they don't really know, they might know that coffee is a bean, but is it like a natural product? Is it a cherry? They don't know that. They don't know that coffee can vary depending on where it's grown or how it's processed. They just have a generic idea of I like a flat white from a lifestyle point of view. So even just by talking about flavor, we begin to kind of imbue in them the idea that coffee can taste different depending on how it's grown, the specific type of plant, and how you process it. So that's on our bags. We just have like a flavor note. It doesn't tell you everything about the coffee, but it's to try to start to convince our customers that might not already be bought into specialty coffee movement that actually things can taste different. Now that works on a number of levels. Like my parents, they do drink my coffee, but like it's a very easy guide for them. They like anything with like chocolate and nuts. They don't want like anything like heavily processed, but they don't have to look and figure out what anaerobic natural means. This is very accessible and simple, but really it's all driven by having quality representations of all of those things. Like whether it's Brazil, Ethiopia, Panama Gesha, like all of those things are, can we find something that is representative? Well,
So when you say quality, how are you thinking of that word? Like, is it like the intensity of a flavor note? Is it the like complex? Like, what does that word mean for the consumer?
for us as professionals, we've always looked for like the lack of negative attributes, if you like. But on top of that, it's about like structure. So do I have like a set of structured tasting notes? Is there like transparency in the cup? Is there structured acidity? The more complex and structured the acidity, the better. And then sweetness as well. Is it like structured, or is it just this kind of blend of non-quality attributes? So for example, like we buy like quite heavily processed Colombians, but we're looking in there for actually, do they have structured acidity? Do they have multiple kinds of acidity? And how does that contribute to the overall coffee? But we'll also buy like washed Ethiopia. And it's the same kind of representation, like, is there actually structure in there? And that's what we're looking for. So lack of negative, and then like when you drink a cup, like what we're looking for is actually to be able to have a set of attributes which support each other. So like the flavor, the body, everything works together. Like we just bought a like infused coffee for Halloween. And like most infused coffees I hate, but we found one. Like it's about quality, right? Like if I find, it's not about being dogmatic about, oh, we're only going to buy washed coffees or natural coffees, or we only are going to buy things that are really heavily fermented. But it's about finding the best representations of those things and actually giving our customers a new experience of those.
Yeah. Actually, I was curious because Pascal, we were talking about before we started infused coffees, and I'd just be curious that one of the things you mentioned, if I can share, is that you get asked questions from producers like, "Should I do this? What do you think of this?" And I think that Gesha was another moment where a lot of farmers were going to be like, "Should I start growing this?" How do you navigate those kind of conversations as somebody who I imagine sometimes they'll look and go like, "Oh, union containers." And so how do you navigate that kind of power imbalance that can sometimes arise when producers seeing a trend and they're looking at you as a buyer and an expert and a potential customer for them? How do you kind of work through those conversations in a way that can be fair for everybody?
I think, to be honest, so I always say, no, well, it's very unlikely that we would buy container volumes of anaerobic coffees or infused coffees. So you wouldn't not find a buyer in us for that. I think it's important to also discuss the risks with producers. You see a lot on social media, and sometimes on social media things are maybe painted a lot brighter than they actually are. There are pictures of pretty bags and amazing coffees, and you think, wow, that's so cool, but you don't know if they're actually selling this coffee. Um, so for producers, and many producers in the world who have, less than 5 hectares or maybe less than 1 hectare of coffee, sacrificing a big part of their harvest or investing the little profit that they had from last year in an experimental process is very, very risky. And we're talking about risk of, having food on the table next year or being able to send your children to school next year. So I always say, if you can bear the risk and if you could trial, you should see it as an experiment. And if you have a 100-hectare farmer, then obviously he probably can bear that risk a little bit better. But be aware that you have a high chance of the coffee not turning out what you think it is, or your buyer backing out. So think twice before you start such a process. And I think in terms of recommending varieties, I always say go to your local agronomist. I hear so many people saying, oh, in Brazil they're growing Obata, it's amazing, the quality is great, the yield is great, pest and disease resistant. But that in Minas Gerais, Brazil, random example, that it works doesn't mean that it works in the highlands of Guatemala where with Tenango. It's a different climate, a different soil, a different altitude. It's very risky, I think, to be advising those kinds of things. So don't do it.
And Dario, just to go back to something that I think both you and Ian talked about when starting the roasteries was this idea of control. And as a roastery scales, you often go maybe from like you can roast every batch, you have enough time, and you can taste it, and then, like there's a pace that's okay. But then as you scale, typically your demand goes past the pace that you can continue to do all those things. And so you're often building systems around quality control or ensuring that you can everything you've built your brand on, the whole reason they're buying your stuff still happens. And many roasters things to slip. It turns into like, we just don't have time to taste every batch. Like we got to put it in a bag and send it at the same day often. So as you scale, how are you adapting your systems to ensure that you retain that quality?
It's actually such a relevant question for us as a team right now, because I was actually standing with my roastery manager in the roastery looking at this mess of boxes before shipping out our subscriptions the other day, thinking we were saying to each other, we need a better system for the basic things that happen every month, but they catch us off guard every month. Like this, that's just a small example, but the same things. And the shift from small business to maybe a medium sized business now is a difficult one to make. As a person, I'm good at starting things and doing my job well, but then I expect everybody else in the team to do their jobs really well without being managed. Um, so I think it's been an interesting process to going back to quality control and making sure that the attributes that we're known for, or the coffees that we're known for, remain the coffees that we are shipping out every day. We have had to make changes. When I started the business, like so many small, passionate coffee roasters, I was like, I'm roasting every batch of coffee myself. I know what I'm shipping out the door, and that's never going to change. But I wouldn't be in Europe for 2.5 weeks if that was the case. Now we have systems in place where, um, we have people who can in the team who can roast the coffees, you can cup the coffees, you can make decisions around the coffees. I still have a very high degree of involvement because at the end of the day, I think the artistic side of coffee is knowing what you want it to taste like, and the scientific side of it is knowing how to get it there. And the scientific side is much easier to teach than the artistic side because it's so subjective. So I need to remain very involved in the QC side of things. But I think as the team has worked together for a longer time, we've become very aligned on what we believe a good coffee to be, and we can get there as a team much faster now. And there's less, um, you know, movement from the sort of like profile that we're after. But certainly the tools we use also make a massive difference. Obviously, we here talking about the Akawa as an example of a tool that has made my life so much easier as a coffee buyer. My main role in my business is, besides running the business, is buying coffee and profiling our coffees. So having tools that can deliver a consistent result for us, from our sample roasters through to our production roasting machines, has been massive. So I would say it's less of a problem that I've solved, and more of a tension that I'm constantly managing. It never really goes away. I don't think there's a one answer to that. It's definitely something that's a daily focus for us to maintain control of quality, using the tools and the team's knowledge at the same time. Yeah.
How do you achieve quality right now? What's your approach?
We were talking about this earlier. I think like um the one thing that I'm relatively good at is choosing a good lot amongst good lots. So sourcing green is something that I'm really, really passionate about. And I think it's the one thing that we've kind of got right most of the time. And with good raw materials, everything else becomes so much easier. So that's definitely been the focus for me, is if we just keep the main thing, and not get distracted from obsession over quality of the coffee itself. You know, the packaging's cute and the social media campaigns are great, and we need them to sell the product and to be sustainable, and to be able to do things the way that we want to requires a certain level of volume. But I think, as I said, keeping the main thing, chasing after those amazing coffees. And for us, the way that we've done that practically is by building relationships with the same producers year on year, because then we actually get offered the good stuff, instead of jumping around to like whatever's trendy right now.
Actually, just on, I'd be curious on the whatever's trendy right now. Like, as a multi roaster, and even in the coffees that you guys offer, you often will have coffees that are really great quality, but also have like their own brand associated with them. Like the producer has built a bit of a following or something like that. And we're kind of living through an interesting era where more than probably ever, consumers will know Mr. Lasso or something. And that just didn't happen before. And so there seems to be kind of like a lot of roasters will move and get coffee from those farmers because they've managed to get a cut through brand. But where do you see yourself as somebody who is so customer facing and helping build brands for these other producers? Because sometimes you'll taste those like really brand name coffees and you'll be like, yeah, it's all right. But like this coffee that I've never heard of is amazing. So how do you champion kind of like how do you see that relationship between champion kind of people that folks don't know anything about versus those like brand names that will be bought off the shelf and will cause excitement on social media?
I think, again, it comes down to a conversation that we had earlier, Dario and I, and we were chatting about like, how do you ensure that you are, rather than just copying what seems to work for other people, how do you ensure that you're actually going out and being objective whenever, it could be like your roasting style, it could be your packaging style, it could be the equipment that you use. But also it comes down to the coffee that you source. And it is very tempting, to go out and buy some Omlagon. But I like whenever we come to sourcing coffees and, competition is a particular thing, but across the spectrum of the coffees that we source, like we're always looking for, okay, do we already have a relationship with this person? If not, that's fine, but we want to keep trying to buy from the same people because we want to set that as a standard going forward. But if we don't, well, is the kind of quality price trade-off there? So for example, if I'm going to be charged maybe $100 per kilo for a Colombian coffee that, okay, we might sell because of a name, the quality doesn't hold up against, someone else who is charging $20 for the same varietal, but it tastes better, then it makes much more sense for us to support someone a little bit smaller and start to try and build a relationship with them. Like Wilton Benitez was not new to the coffee world whenever we first used him, but I think we were the first people to start using his coffee in the UK. And actually having a little bit of a relationship with him that we've built year on year has allowed us to start buying rather than by the box, by the pallet, and by multiple pallets, which for us is a lot. And that kind of relationship where, okay, you choose someone because you kind of like the vision that they have and you like the attention to detail that they have and you enjoy their product and you're able to have like the quality to price ratio, right? Like you're not paying an inflated price just because of a name. And that's really key. But I think that, quality is to be found in all sorts of places and you don't need to go to necessarily a big name producer to find quality, and you're always paying a premium, I feel, whenever you do that. It's easier. And you do get maybe customers who tag along because of that. But we've found that on e-commerce and in store as well, like our retail customers trust our choices, right? They're bought into like the journey that we have. And they know some of the coffees that we've had now for like a couple of years, and they're enjoying those because they've found them here, not because they've, heard of Nestor Lasso somewhere else. So that's for us, like the real brand loyalty piece is like we develop a relationship with a producer who might be a little bit less known, and that carries through the years. And that producer may or may not gain acclaim, but our customers will know them.
Nice. And I guess like Pascal, Foreman is probably getting those like people to become that uber nerd in coffee, but Union more than I'd say any other roaster in the UK has brought people from commodity coffee over to specialty coffee. It's like the fact that my off license has Union coffee and so many do is amazing. It means that like it sits among that shelf of pretty bad coffee, but it's sort of the great one that's there. And I'd be curious, how do you think about that purchasing for that audience? That like that you're sitting there, that person that last time they bought it might have bought in something that was vacuum packed and pre-ground, but this time they're going for you. How do you feel about how you nudge them into specialty? Because you probably don't start with the obligum, but you probably start somewhere a little bit closer. So what's the thinking through that?
It's a good question. And I think people do taste the difference when when they try this coffee, which has a bit more structure to it, is sweeter, has a more balanced acidity, doesn't have any negative flavors to it. But as you say, just chocolate and nuts, which are good qualities in a coffee. Even if you're not like a super taster, you can appreciate the difference. So I really believe that just getting people to drink it, and that's also the best proof, right? We were able to grow, and people are looking. If they buy it again, that's the best proof you can have. So what you then look for when you source is a very balanced coffees, sweet coffees, not too crazy on the acidity, so to say. Then you see people moving up, wanting to try something different. So it's sometimes it is a trial and error, and you see if it sells or it doesn't sell. But overall, even within the more balanced coffees, then people start to realize that there is a difference between a coffee from Peru or Brazil, because one has more nuts and the other one has more red fruits. Maybe we're already using a sort of a more exciting flavor note before we go to the maracuya and all the funky notes. Yeah.
What would you say is like the most successful coffee doing that? Like doing that transition right now for you guys?
I think coffees from Peru are crowd pleasers. Yes. Sweet, balanced chocolates. Yeah, we got a lot of good feedback on coffees from Peru.
Do you think consumers are grabbing them because it says Peru? Like, do they know, or is it so happens they grab it and they realize it's delicious?
I do wonder about that, because when I talked with like random non-coffee people about coffee, it's always Colombia and Brazil, and if they're or Ethiopia maybe. Peru is never on the names list yet, so maybe in 5 years it is, and then. So no, I don't think in the case of Peru that it's because the bag says Peru. Yeah.
Can I ask, like, obviously you buy a lot of coffee, but the difference between, and you buy some really high-end stuff. So whenever you're sourcing, like, how do you feel that sourcing the more accessible coffees, like Informs, buying the really high-end stuff? It's like you have Guginoides from
Yeah.
Lada, for example, and it's not alone among the very high-end of coffees that you source.
Sorry.
So how does buying in volume, like the more classic coffees, inform how you purchase at the more expensive end? Do you feel you apply like the same approach, or is it a little bit more like name driven? Or
No, it's almost the same thinking process as you just described very, very well. It is about, with Immaculada, we had a relationship already since 2014, I think. We actually had the Eugenioides, I think, like 8 years ago. It was too early for it. It didn't really, it was really hard to get people excited about it. And now, and so we did it again. We tried it again. And the same with the Sudan Rumey and the Laurina. We did Bourbons with them, still not container volumes, but bigger volumes. So it is about quality, price. Is this something that people get excited about? So yeah, it's the same principles. Yeah.
Cool. On that, getting consumers to actually get the coffee, I think often there's like a lot of communication about the artisanal nature of specialty coffee. Hand roasted has been around fucking ever. Um, but like as a scale up roaster, you're probably more than a lot of people looking at the kit that you buy because you're like, shit, I need bigger kit. So things like automation are more part of it. I think part of this whole like we're living in a golden era of coffee is like automation has done a lot of heavy lifting for consistency. But I'd be curious, like, how does your production and the changing nature of your production as it leans towards things like automation change how you then communicate that story and that communicate that idea of artisanal coffee roasting? Because that is a big differential compared to like the massive roasteries.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, yeah, the hand roasted, like that's a joke in our roastery all the time, like all the burnt hands out there, you know. But I think, um, for me, the artisanal side of it will never go away. I think that the automation helps us to achieve a higher level of quality because it frees us up as coffee professionals to focus on things that we might not have the time to do if it wasn't for the automation. So, very practically, I have two roasting machines with really good auto replicate functionality. I've got the 100X Mikawa and then my Stronghold S7X for our comp coffees. And the replication is like really, really good. So I can actually answer emails while I'm roasting coffee, which frees me up to then cup more coffee later. And that knock-on effect, I think, is what has been really positive for us and allowed us to actually get more involved in the artisanal decisions, but using the tools to help us to achieve that end result, if that makes sense. So we're not at the point yet where a machine can decide how to roast the coffee. We still need to make those decisions, but now we are starting to use technology that allows us to use the machine to replicate the decisions that we've made more effectively. Um, and I think that's a positive for us. It's the same discussion that I think cafe owners have had for a long time. More people in the on the barista side of the coffee spectrum, where is a puck press taking away the barista's job? No, in fact, it helps them to do a better job. And I think we're past that.
Well, I don't know.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, I was in Roslyn yesterday, and I couldn't believe the volume of coffee moving out of the shop. And if we didn't have the modern tools that we have today, I don't think that would be possible. And on the roastery side of things, it's exciting to see that sort of technology arriving, for us to start making our lives a bit easier on the mundane so that we can start focusing on the exciting more often.
What messages then do you think are resonating through? It's not hand roasted. What messages right now do you see, at least maybe in South Africa, but I know that you also sell a lot to Europe. So what is really resonating with people making them come to you?
So when I started roasting coffee, I thought, I must admit, when I started roasting coffee, I didn't know that there was a difference between commodity and specialty. That's how far behind I was in understanding. And when I did begin to understand and I started to read about the struggles at origin, and I think South Africa has the benefits of being 5 years behind everywhere else. So we kind of have a roadmap to follow already, which is great for us. Um, but I became completely obsessed, I would say, with the idea of communicating sustainability. And then I quickly came to the realization that my customers, unfortunately, on average, didn't really care. And it was all about flavor, actually. So for me, it's about communicating um, flavor, bringing a lot of variety to the table. Our customers want variety. They very seldom do we find customers buying the same coffee over and over and over again. Our most successful products are variety based, curated subscriptions and that type of thing. So we constantly have to change the coffees that we're working with and keep that rotation going, which is difficult when you're small and trying to trade as direct as possible. But I think the message in the marketplace for us is we're obsessed with quality and we want to make the quality accessible to our customers. That's probably more important to us, or it has been more important to us than, direct trade, hand roasted, transparently traded. Those often buzzwords for us have been very much true. We do display all our pricing and that type of thing, but it's the least visited page on our website. So it's definitely quality and flavor focus for us.
And I guess, Ian, because you talked about quality as well. Specialty coffee was really like built with this idea that if you pay more for quality, then it almost like something, 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 justice will happen. like, um, and I think what you just said there about consumers, like sustainability messaging works a little bit, but it's not like imagine your does it work with tons or do you no, it doesn't work so much. So that means the values that you have, and ensuring those values happen are on you because you don't have that like financial incentive to go like, I got to get more of that sustainable coffee. So how do you do that? What is that process? Whether be as a multi roaster buying through other roasteries, or when yourself you're buying through an importer, you have that kind of distance from the actual farm level, and you have those values, and it's sometimes really hard to actually express the values in your purchasing. So how do you do it?
And I think also understand like, and not just express the values through your purchasing, but understand how the values match up to the reality at origin. Um, I have always felt as someone who started like a cafe first that uh, our energy should be on, ensuring that our employees were treated well first. Sorry, this is a very roundabout answer, but we'll get there. Like, so if we ensure firstly that the people that work for us have like a sustainable livelihood and that they have a career and that they have some sense of progression, that they don't have to come to work when they're sick, like all of those things, if we take care of the people that we have the most impact over, which are our employees, that's the starting point. And as we grow, like we have had the benefit of being able to buy exceptional green coffee. Um, the reality is that we do not yet have the ability to travel to origin and understand what the reality is there. And even if we were, we still wouldn't know the truth of it. I think we're in an awkward position because we're always focused on quality, and we hope that that means better livelihoods for people at origin. We hope that it means that producers are breaking even at least, if not turning a profit. But that money is invested, and we don't know what happens to it. It's even if we pay the producer directly, we just don't have the understanding. And I think like it comes down to what we build our model around. And because our model is built around quality, we haven't yet gone to seek out that answer. But it doesn't mean that as we grow and we have the capability to do more, and especially as we start to broaden out and try to reach more people than those who are just interested in the top 1% of coffee, that we'll have to start thinking about how we buy sustainably and how we ensure that like money is going to partners that share the values that we have of treating our staff well. So it's on the to-do list, like, but it's like, how do we ensure that we grow to a point where we're able to do this sustainably, and we're able to actually put the money in and then grow and make sure that the greater money that we're spending with producers is actually having a big impact. Because the reality is that at most, maybe we buy a couple of pallets from someone at the minute, and generally those are really large producers anyway. So as a percentage of their income, it's very minimal. But yeah.
And I guess Pascal, you with your experience working, well, living in producing countries, but also working so long, how do you see that current sort of state of that promise in specialty coffee that we can decommodify coffee by celebrating its individuality, and then we can reward accordingly? Do you feel it's working? Do you like where do you see it at right now? Given how long you've been in it.
I mean, I think it's an ongoing challenge. I do believe that people, and as you say, but I almost like every cent more at origin really makes a big difference, and probably bigger here than it would a consumer here would suffer from like 1 cent more in price. And sometimes you just have to believe in that in need. If we do put great, besides when sourcing, looking at quality, we also want to make sure that the people we work with align with our values. Our values are outlined in our code of conduct. We are a living wage employer in the UK. We want the people that we work with, if they use hired labor, also treat their workers well. We're a member of the Ethical Trade Initiative here in the UK, so that keeps us on our toes with respect to like human and labor rights. What do we need to look out for? But it is challenging, right? We have inflation here, price rises here. People are saying, why is coffee so expensive? But on the other hand, farmers are also suffering a 300% price increase in fertilizers during the pandemic. And their minimum wages also go up. And then we're not even talking about living wages, because in many of these countries, the minimum wage doesn't even come close to a living wage. So it is an ongoing challenge and an ongoing process. And in the end, every cent counts that goes towards origin. I think the challenge I find is we love to be able to sort of quantify that, right? Like, we want to know that the cooperative bought 100 goats from that money, or they sent 10 children to school. But sometimes it also just can mean that that family had a better meal. And you can't really like collect all the information. You sometimes just have to trust it. But if you look at yourself, it would also be weird. Like if I give you a raise and then it's like, oh, but now you have to tell me on what you spend it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I did.
And then that's the challenge, I think. Yeah.
What would be each of your advice, and maybe just starting yourself, Ian, on buying coffee that is better for the producer, maybe better for the planet? What do you think they should be looking out for, given that most of the time all they've got the bag in front of them? What sort of hints do you think they can make?
In a similar way to, whenever I wanted to find a low caffeine alternative to the high quality coffee that we were drinking when my wife was pregnant, I would go very specifically and look for someone who could provide that in terms of farms. So that was like doTERRA, like their low calf blend. And that's all we drank at home for 6 months. But I had to go to a roaster in Germany to buy it. So if I was really keen to buy very sustainable coffee, I would look for farms or cooperatives or producers that I could buy into. So for example, like Long Miles Project in Burundi, and I think they've expanded a little bit now, like who are doing a lot of hard work to actually increase the GDP of Burundi, which is heavily reliant on coffee production. So I would buy into the producer rather than, to be honest, the roastery. Right? Like, because that's how I can learn more. Like, and there's still an element of me trusting, Long Miles Project to do their job or doTERRA to do their job, but I can go and look at them and then look at who's bought them. That would be my approach, but that's maybe a coffee nerd's approach.
No, that's good. And then it's kind of similar, like exact same thing. Like, how do you, Pascal, think that the consumers can go and know that that coffee was, say, fairly sourced? Like, what should hints should they be looking for that something was like, we'll say, more on the ethical end of sourcing?
Yeah, I think like, it's challenging because, we always talk also internally about how much information can you provide, right? On the back, there's only so much, and the flavor notes do matter, but we also want to show the name of the farm or the cooperative, because that goes back to that transparency. Because my thinking is, indeed, you can then Google the name of the farm if the information is not on our website, and check for yourself whether you like what you read. And sustainability is super complex: economic, social, environmental, and there are going to be very few coffees that hit all like 3 boxes to 100%, and people have personal preferences for certain things, and that is okay, because every step counts in saving the world. So I would look out for roasters who at least have more information on where they source from. Maybe not on the package, but then on their website. So yeah, it's almost the same answer. You have to go back all the way to the farm. Third-party certifications is not something we necessarily think provide all the sustainability that's that we would like to have. But on the other hand, if you are in the supermarket and you have 1 second, and I would say if the coffee is super cheap, then you already know that it's not good. I think you have to look at the price. And yes, there is a risk that when you buy an expensive coffee that you're buying for the brand or the very pretty packaging. But that risk is there. But if you buy like a kilo of coffee for £5, then you're not doing any good to the world of coffee growers. So maybe it's almost the other way.
And then I guess in the last version of it is if people want to support a roastery where they treat themselves well, that they see it's about how they, with be their staff or their impact. How do you think consumers should best look, and what hints should they be looking at from a roastery that they think like do those sort of values?
I think that's tough. Like supporting local is obviously something that we speak about a lot, but here I am in London, very much not local. I think social media has been such an amazing equalizer for businesses and business owners and um, any professionals to communicate their message. And I would say that if I was looking, I have my favorite roasters, and I would say that most of what I know about them is through their social media facade. Um, More often than not, when I've got to know them, like most of it is authentic and true and good. But those are sort of the best avenues that I think people have to making those decisions. And the great thing is that today we have more access than ever before to behind the scenes information, because I think a lot of companies realize that if they want people to buy into their brands, they need to share what is going on behind the scenes, and be completely transparent. Well, like not completely transparent in every case, but at least transparency about the good, the bad, the struggles. Um, that's what I would be looking for. The
Recommendation is more doom scrolling.
spend all your time scrolling through social media. It's good for your mental health and your coffee shop purchases. Yeah, but I think that's a big part of it. And earlier we were talking about like how did Bluebird from South Africa, and not just South Africa. We're in like the most random little town in the middle of nowhere in South Africa, basically. We're not even relevant in terms of geographic location to the South African coffee industry. We're so far away from everybody, but it's on purpose. I kind of wanted to do that to make it harder, because it's not hard enough already. Um, but I think without social media, without telling our story transparently, we'd never connect with the customers we have, with the other professionals we get to work with, and we've had to work really, really hard to make those connections, to be in a position where I can sit down and record a podcast. 5 years ago, that would have seemed like not really a possibility, just because there I am sitting back at home, learning about coffee from a distance. But now I feel a responsibility to give other people who are starting their journeys the same sort of transparency that other roasteries were giving me when I got started. I don't know if that makes sense, but those are the businesses that I resonate with, or the ones who are sharing their story authentically.
Cool. And now, so basically, you've got one of the best brewers of coffee in the world, one of the best sourcers of coffee in the world, and one of the best roasters of coffee in the world. Do you guys have any questions for either of these three amazing people?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I'm not sure of the volumes that you guys are roasting, but if you're buying the premium coffee from producers, do you feel it makes an impact to their business and their lives, buying the high grade coffee rather than more of the lower grade coffee? How does that impact the farmers?
You buy the most coffee, I think.
Um,
Oh, you hold that.
So yes, I'd say the impact is positively because coffee is well, it's a fruit. It grows on a tree. A farmer never grows 100% 88 scoring coffees. And actually, I think what I did see is like with farmers that started focusing on micro lots and picking the right cherries, like it lifts up their overall quality because they're going to implement better practices. So their coffees that might not be like or bordering specialty coffee also become better, and that's actually the bulk of what most people grow. So I think you're very happy with you if you're able to buy both and also pay a good price for the not so good coffee. That's not the right way of describing it, but the one tier below that. Yeah.
I think from my perspective, my sort of philosophy on buying in general, and this isn't a perfect world, would be to work with a producer to buy a larger lot that we would then, would be at a lower quality, lower price point, then buy a bunch of micro lots and a bunch of like reserve coffees and be able to support throughout the quality spectrum. It's not always possible. And from people ask me like, how big do I want Bluebird to be? And I have like a volume number in mind. It's got nothing to do with profitability. It's got to do with logistics. Because when we're doing that much turnover, I can bring in full containers from all of the origins we work with. And I'm so reluctant to add producers or origins to our menu because I then have that same internal responsibility or ethical responsibility to myself, to no one else, to then take that same approach with another producer or origin. So we're very, very selective around like who we add to our menu. But what I will say is that if I'm working backwards as a roaster, it's hardest for me to sell our most expensive coffees. The green coffee buyers that I know buying good quality, like expensive coffees, are struggling to sell those coffees to roasters. I would imagine that the producers producing 88 plus coffees are probably in a position where it's not as easy to sell those as it is to sell their larger lots. So I think even if we are just buying the cream of the crop, it needs to go somewhere. And as long as we're paying a good price, I think it probably is adding value, as long as they're able to sell the whole harvest.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, coffee producers, they produce a whole range of different qualities of coffees, and they all have to go somewhere. I think, like, in our ideal scenario, we would have relationships when we grow a little bit with producers where we can buy an 84-point coffee and we can buy an 86 and an 87 and actually buy more of their range. At the minute, usually we're buying quite small volumes, but someone who maybe doesn't need a lot of help, for us that we bought from the last couple of years, we bought incredibly small volumes, 6 or 7 kilos, from a Panamanian producer who was just getting started. And this year he won BOP, Wash Gesha. And for him as a producer who was just getting started, even buying, what was maybe 1% of his harvest was so meaningful because it's, okay, there's a cafe in the UK that trusts me and they're the people I'm going to go to. So, you produce this coffee and you have faith, I think, that you're going to have buyers for it, whatever the quality, So I think it's not about putting people in a position of gratitude, where they feel beholden to us. But the more that we can buy of any producer's production, the better. And the better for that long-term relationship, I think, as well.
It's so funny. I often feel the other way around. Like I always feel so lucky to be able to buy the coffees that we buy. Yeah. I think yeah, when you are working with producers whose coffees are in really high demand, to actually, yeah, like the Janssen geisha that we had earlier, to actually buy from Janssen is like a small miracle every year. And every year I'm like, I'm sure they're going to sell it to us this year. It's going to be, it's going to be much easier to access that coffee. And every year it's like 17 emails before the first response. But it's a good thing when those coffees are so well supported.
And actually, that was my first thought as well, whenever you first asked the question, like, a lot of the coffees that we buy, we are, very lucky or have, not to make a big deal of it, but have worked very hard to buy. Like Eugenoides, for example, that you guys buy, it's because you have a relationship with them. And like for ourselves as well, we put a lot of effort into being able to be in a position to buy that coffee, and you as well, like with him, I still at it.
This is the first year getting to value genuity. So
So like, I mean, that is not representative of coffee producers as a whole, where you have so much demand that you can pick and choose customers. But at the higher end, it is kind of like they can afford to be selected. Yeah.
Any other questions?
If you guys went to a farm, what was the most interesting thing, like thing you saw there in terms of new technologies or something a producer did to skip stuff like, oh, they don't have that technology, so they did this different to reach some kind of quality?
Where do you think that value is being captured then? Because it's not the cafe, and it's not like my sense is not necessarily the coffee industry that's actually capturing the excess value of the actual cost of trade. Like, could be rent, for example, which is like an output of the industry. So like, where's your sense of where like all that extra money, because you're paying more, your producers are getting less, so like it's all that's true. So where do you see it happening? Like, where's it going?
Um, I think that, you know, if you think about a cafe, a London cafe, a lot of us aren't making a lot of money. You know, it is relative to like producers or like pickers a lot of money, but living in this city, like it's maybe like a lot of cafe owners might earn a living wage, for example. I think that's the reality. So there's not a lot of value being captured by cafe owners. There are some who do extraordinarily well. On the roaster side, like, okay, at scale, you can make a lot of money. But again, the reality is that, like we were talking about, do I pay myself or do I reinvest my profits and grow? Right? And that's the reality. Like myself and my business partner, like own a roastery, and we have never taken any money from it. So we have a profit, but that's because we don't have to pay ourselves. And maybe at scale, again, a green importer can make a lot of money, but it takes scale to do that. So I think like we're all in specialty, I think, trying to grow to a point where, you know, we just have enough volume that that percentage of 5 or 15% makes sense. And that's the problem, that the value of actual drink served, at least in the UK, I think it's different in different markets, but the value of actual drink served to customers is just not high enough. Like, even though like a flat white, we charge $3.80, and to some extent that is expensive, you know, like I think we would benefit from like Zurich prices or something like £6 or £7 for a flat white. And but like we've like looked at everything to try and keep that lower. Like trying to focus on.
If you look at like 2010,
Oh yeah, yeah. No, not at all. I think part of it is that we in the UK are afraid of customer like feedback. Like you know, we started at $3.20 for a latte and £3 for a flat white 5 years ago, and that's a very modest level of inflation. So like we're afraid to raise prices because in London especially we are very volume driven. Like you need to have, let's say for the average cafe, like 400 customers through their door a day. So in one of like the world's leading coffee markets, this is me preaching to myself, like we just need to charge more money, you know. Well, how much is your flat white?
I don't.
Where's the question, Darius?
I think my perspective on it is that in South Africa we have a very, like you're talking about living wage and the challenges at origin. I think our like average citizen is living below the breadline and unemployment is super high. So I have a huge responsibility in my business to make sure that, you know, we're doing as best a job we can for everybody involved. Government regulations don't require me to pay a certain amount, and like minimum wage in South Africa is far below what anyone needs to survive. So the responsibility really is on the business owner, and it carries through from, you know, the way that we treat our staff to the way we buy our coffee to the way we do everything. But you know, just like a complete aside, I often get asked the question, we spoke about this earlier as well, like as soon as you're a roaster, the first thing is like, do you visit the farms? And there's like a bit of judgment if the answer is no. And I felt that like in a big way when I first started, like in month one, it's like, do you visit the people you buy coffee from? It's like, no, of course I don't, you know? Um, but as time's gone on, we like starting to be able to do that. And it's fantastic to do that. But my answer to a lot of people is like, I think it's a reality check and a big shock to a lot of people coming from a very like first world Western sort of environment, and then like finding themselves in a coffee farm in Africa. But I deal with that sort of reality every single day right in front of our building, with a huge homeless problem and poverty right on our doorstep. So the responsibility for us is massive, from our local community through to the communities we're buying coffee from. And it's actually the same problem all the way through the chain, which I think is like a little bit, it's an interesting challenge. So when we increasing our prices, it's, we charge £1.50 max for a flat white in South Africa. So if you want cheap coffee, come to South Africa for a holiday, and you can drink, geisha on our bar sometimes for, £2.50. Um, yeah, exactly. So I think the reality, the pricing reality is that, everywhere we all have our own unique challenges. Like my building costs won't be anything close. I would not want to know what you paid to be here. Too much. Exactly. Um, but I think that from my perspective, no one is making a huge amount of money in the supply chain. I don't think there's a heck of a lot of excess going anywhere. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you exclude the Panama geisha and those Genoides, I think overall nobody's making a lot of money. It's hard conversations you have with producers, but you have to explain them. They ask, why is coffee so expensive? And I saw it. It's like, yeah, but you earn $15 a day. The barista that makes the coffee earns that an hour. And do you know how many coffees they need to sell to pay just for the rent, right? So that's complicated. But on the other hand, you can only buy what you sell if you want a sustainable business and a business that keeps on going. So you need to find a balance in there. And I think it's an overall thing with food products. I always say, like, I see people with an iPhone of $1,000, I think the things are more expensive, in their hand in the supermarket, complaining that the price of tomatoes went up 10 cents. That's just, we're so used nowadays that food needs to be there, it needs to be cheap, it needs to be convenient, and it's not gonna be, because there's climate change and the world is getting hotter, but that's a huge mindset change. So that
I think that like coffee and, as you point out, like food and drink, for the large part, we acknowledge are like broken.
Yeah.
Like, but we're in them, and all we can try to do is make them a little bit better at a time, because we're part of this like vehicle which is just moving. That's okay. How do I do a little bit better and a little bit better? And like, as all of us as coffee professionals, I think, like, hopefully in a long coffee career, I think we owe it to the industry that has given us this job, which can be full of joy, to actually try and make it that little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. The truth is that by 2050, half of the land available now for growing coffee won't be available to grow coffee anymore. So we can only go up, and then we're going to destroy primary forest. Well, with the EU deforestation law, that's not going to be an option. If we don't do anything, we'll end up drinking Brazilian and Vietnamese coffee, because in the rest of the world, it will only be maybe the Panama geisha or something that's still there. So it's almost indeed a responsibility indeed to just keep going and keep spreading the message. And as a consumer, if you want that diversity and flavor, because we showed them that a coffee from Peru tastes different from a coffee from Costa Rica, there should be a little bit of willingness to pay for that.
I think I'm totally inspired by the work that you guys do. And my journey in coffee has been inspired by coffee professionals who are so far ahead of me in terms of understanding and time in the industry and what you've achieved. So I definitely feel like I've anything that Bluebird has achieved so far has just been, you know, doing it our way, but inspired by those who've done it already. And I don't think that, I think it's important that our businesses keep doing what they're doing, because I think we're doing business in a way that is good for coffee, and hopefully we can inspire other people to do the same thing. But I think like all the questions around pricing and everything are so relevant, but they're probably far more relevant um, to a lot of buyers and roasters outside of this room, if that makes sense. Because I think that the businesses seated here are doing a good job. We can always do better, obviously, but that's my perspective on it. So thank you for setting such a great example for the newbies like myself. You're not a newbie, and I'm a newbie.
I have a product placement question. So I'm just curious, like how does it come in handy at different stages? Some people really start because like tiny machine and then they go to something bigger. Or someone literally roasted like 300 kilos of pounds, say. So I was really curious, like how do you translate this information that you get from it? You share it with producers? Does that happen? Like,
My sample roasting journey, just to kick this little point off, was really quite funny. I bought that one machine. I had a Bullet, which was a 1 kilo machine, and I figured out how to roast down to like 300 grams. But to get producers to send me that much green coffee when I was buying, you know, a tiny amount of coffee from them was not easy. So I quickly realized I needed something smaller. So I sold the Bullet, bought a 10 kilo drum roaster, which I installed in my home office. This is where Bluebird started. And then I had no small machine to roast anything on. So then it was like, oh gosh, you know, buying or getting roasted samples from green traders who would send me roasted samples. That didn't work. Borrowed a hucky, one of those little, yeah, from a friend. Lit so much coffee on fire. And yeah, just it was the worst experience ever. And then eventually bought a Kawa 50 gram, which was a huge investment for me at the time. The business was really, really small, and it seemed unnecessary, to be honest with you. It seemed like, surely I can find another way to do this. But I eventually bought the machine, and instantly, like, processing samples became so easy. I roasted really bad coffee on it first, and then once I figured out how to roast on it, the samples tasted good. But yeah, I think without the Akawa, just to go to that point, we obviously have an Akawa event. Going from not having a good sample roaster to having a good sample roaster to change my ability to buy coffee and buy the right coffees because the samples tasted good. And then to go from the 50 to the 100X now, again, the automation for the first crack detection has been amazing. And now the new humidity curve is so interesting. For those of you who don't know, there's like because of the first crack detection technology, there's a humidity graph that you can see after roasting a certain coffee, well, after every batch. That is new data. I've never seen that before. I didn't know what was happening in the drum from a humidity point of view, and I don't know what I'm going to do with that information yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out, because I'm sure that we can translate that to our production roasting and that type of thing. But yeah, it's been having a good sample roaster is important.
I'm not a roaster, but like we have in our very small business, we have 3 Akawas. Partly because, so I have one in my house, my business partner has one in his house, and we have one in our training space. We have other sample roasters as well for some reason. But as not being a roaster, you know, whenever one of us is traveling, we can still receive samples, and I can still competently, with someone's help, choose a profile which is suitable and to roast coffee on, and be confident that what I'm tasting is okay. It might be like our first go at a roast, but it's still unlocking a good amount of the potential of the coffee, and we can confidently make green buying decisions based on that. So like the ease of use for me is right up there.
So in the only origin trip that I was lucky enough to go, it was Nicaragua, just before pandemic. It was a medium-sized farm, and they had an Akawa. And I was like, this is great because they were roasting their coffee there. And I think part of the failures in the business is that the producers know their coffee. So I was in a cutting, and they they have the coffee was posted there. And we're like, this is great that they can do this themselves. And some people, working in the pub, be able to cup the coffee and know what was the place. So that was very nice to see.
For us, it's very similar with the Ikawa to you. So when I started in coffee 12 years ago, I did some sample roasting on the Proba, but then you start doing other things and you don't do it anymore. So I never learned how to roast or sample roast, and I thought that was it. And then Ikawa. And now I can't stop.
Stuff.
Indeed,
Everyone's a
it
roaster.
depends on how fit your network is, because you'll be like, what profile would you use for this and this coffee? And they can share it on WhatsApp. So that's for me personally. And within Union, it saves, I think it's during the pandemic, we moved to Ikawa sample roasting, and it just saves a lot of time. It allows you to also sometimes calibrate. We have some of the producers also have Ikawa, so then we can exchange profiles, and we have eliminated another variable in when we cup. So that's how we use it. Yeah.